When we see issues with the banking market, you could think of a financial collapse and what could happen. What would be the effect of a global economic collapse? That is what we're going to be looking at in today's video. So let's go ahead and get into it. Now, knowing what to expect if this ever should happen can really help your family minimize any of the impact that's going to be felt. Starting at the beginning, and it is a rising mental health issues. Now, of course, with no money comes in little opportunity. With that, it can have a toll on our mental health. And we're starting to see this on a bigger scale as it sits today. We know you can expect more depression, more anxiety, even suicide attempts can be increased when the mental health crisis continues to increase. If you don't have access to medical treatment that people do need, you could see a big downside with this. Now, of course, that goes hand in hand with healthcare. When you're limited with your healthcare options, chances are, if anything severely impacts you, again, thinking on a global economic scale, if something should happen, you're not going to have the ability or have the lack of funds to not only pay for staff, but buying medical equipment, looking at research and development. The growing risk of disease and medical needs could go astronomical and could be overwhelming, especially in some of the poorly developed countries. Even looking at the United States, I think if something like this should happen, you're going to see a really big downturn. And of course, people are going to start looking toward the government, and they get into imposing of martial law. Now, of course, this seems like we've seen it with riots, we've seen it with a lot of disorder, but the government can impose martial law, which I know is kind of a crazy thing to think of. When this happens, you will lose the majority of your rights, and the military will take control over a lot of different things. Now, we have never seen it happen, but of course, never say never, because you never know what is coming down the pipeline and what we could see in the future. Then, of course, another one that we're starting to see already is increased power outages. Now, when I lived in California years ago, they had the brownouts. They were kind of going, this not only increases with economic issues, but it also may force companies, and actually power companies may not have the means to keep the grid not only maintained, but also keep the length and the frequency of power flowing to your home, which means it could behoove you to go out and get a generator. But of course, if it's not solar, which a lot of people are going to solar panels, you could have a hard time getting electricity. And when we even start thinking of the basic fundamentals of the United States, I have been to Central America, I've been to South America, I've been to Europe, been to Africa, traveled a lot when I was in the military, and seeing things that we have here and the amount of things really that we do kind of take for granted compared to some of the third world countries that I did visited, it's kind of crazy to see what could come out of this. Now, of course, we're also seeing rapid inflation. I think it's kind of leveled out at this point, but if we're looking at a global economic collapse, rapid inflation would go hand in hand. Now, of course, during this, the value of money could decrease. Some countries, the value of the money could decrease exponentially. If the value of the money decreases, the price of goods and services are going to go up, which makes everything less affordable. And guess what? That's exactly what we are seeing today. Since we know, the value of money has been kind of the same. CPI, the consumer price index, and inflation has went up a little bit. But if you're feeling the squeeze like we've seen with a lot of Americans right now, things are exponentially more expensive. And of course, there's no anticipation of when prices are going to start coming down. Even if the Federal Reserve makes the decision to lower it 0.25%, doesn't mean it's going to affect any of the prices. Might affect some of the loan prices, maybe some of the prices on mortgages, but overall, the food prices, the rent prices, things that we have seen increase are not going to be really going down anytime soon, which is kind of sad to say. I don't know if wages need to keep up with it or if there's anything else we need to do, which of course can lead hand in hand to an increased poverty. When we look at an economic crisis, jobs will become more scarce. It'll be a lot more difficult. Loss of employment can cause families to be unable to pay their bills, even afford the basic necessities, which again can kind of snowball. We've seen this kind of happen with the housing market where a lot of people started getting laid off, a lot of businesses started collapsing, and a lot of people didn't have money to pay their bills. And it was just a domino effect. And again, a lot of people turned to the government for help, but of course it is very limited depending on the situation that they're in with an economic collapse. And of course, telecommunications. When you think of smartphones, when you think of everything, demand for smartphones, for cell phones, for internet usage would skyrocket based on this. Everybody wants the news. Everyone wants to be well informed. And of course, providers might not be able to keep up with the demand, meaning that this could be an inability to connect not only to your loved ones if they're not locally, but also the ability to get medical resources, to get news, to get updates on everything that is going on, meaning that your family can create a meeting place so you know where everyone is going to be at a set time, because if something happens like this, which is not saying that it's going to, but there is always the possibility, and being prepared for it can make a really big difference. And of course, leading to the gas shortage. We looked at the electricity, we looked at a couple different things. Gas shortage, fuel reserves at the gas station will become depleted. Now, we've seen this with lately that they've been releasing a lot of United States oil, and I believe it was like 1 million barrels that that President Biden released. And a lot of people are saying we shouldn't be tapping into those oil reserves because if something happens, but we know everything globally with fighting two war fronts with Ukraine and also with Israel and everything that is going on in that side of the world makes it incredibly difficult, not only for the public transportation point, but also getting fuel and getting things that we need here to really operate and run as a country, where your local, gas stations might not have any gas that is readily available. And of course, similar to what we've seen in 2008, mortgage defaults and foreclosures. And of course, if a family is struggling financially, the last really build that folds, or the thing that really breaks the camel's back, is the ability to no longer pay your mortgage. We could see an economic crisis where people are not able to pay the mortgages. Banks can't take them out. Now you start seeing bank fails. And of course, this is again kind of that domino effect. When you look at economic issues, the inability to pay mortgages will result in families losing their home, being forced to go to more apartments, maybe even staying with other relatives. And of course, the bank is going to get all of these homes back that hopefully if you get a job, you can still afford. And of course, homeschooling. We've seen this with COVID. Homeschooling was very reliant on the funding of local government, and schools are very reliant, which means that during an economic crisis, the funds might dry up, or they might not have adequate funds to pay the teachers, which again would result in fewer teachers, meaning canceling classes even on a university level. Parents might have to turn to homeschool, hoping that the technology is still there with cell phone services, internet services, and of course, having some school supplies on hand could really make a big difference if you can't readily get available to them. And of course, a growing interest is in growing your own food. And it's funny because when you think of this article over on MSN.com, it talks about the global economic collapse when you kind of pair a lot of things that are going on right now, including the huge interest in growing your own fruits and vegetables, especially because the cost is astronomical. Families are starting to stockpile it and grow larger and larger gardens. It's becoming popular with growing gardens, raising chickens, learning how to really process your own food at a reduced cost. And of course, at a time of scarcity, you're going to have the ability to have access to all this. Creating a garden is an ideal, even if it's not an economic downturn, because not only is it healthier, it is way more cost efficient and a great bonding experience when you're taking care of it yourself, which leads us into, if you're growing crops, guess what? Now you have something to barter for foods and services. This is a popular activity, of course, years ago when the currency wasn't so prevalent. But if the currency isn't worth as much as it used to be, or the scarcity of it does go, you can kind of sidestep spending money in their entirety. This is where a lot of skills and services trade schools will become more valuable. Like if you have a plumbing issue, if you're not paying them, in cash, which because again, the economic collapse, it is not available, or it is not worth what it is, but ultimately you can exchange some food. There's a bunch of different ways where people might need exactly what you have in services and in goods that you can have. Now, of course, social unrest will escalate. We're starting to see this, and I'm still a little bit worried about what we're going to see during this election this year. And of course, it's natural for protests to take place. We're seeing them all over the nation. There's a real chance for social unrest. Really, disorder will become the norm. A lot of friends and families and neighbors, it is really a fight to survive when it is threatened on an economic and a global level. Then, of course, we're still seeing this with the mass migrations. During a global economic collapse, you can see extreme poverty. You can see access to really food, clean water, shelter, mass people leaving their homes, coming to the United States, going to other countries, looking for a better opportunity, looking for better living conditions. And of course, if we see an economic downturn in some of the third world countries, people will look and move to where they need to go to survive, which of course, if we're losing some of the essentials, contaminated food and water, some of the water and sanitation systems, treatment plants, less testing, less manpower, could lead to tainted food, could really lead to widespread disease and illness. And again, thinking on the global economy and the global scale, there's a lot of stuff that could happen. And of course, looking at skyrocketing unemployment. Unemployment right now doing incredibly well, but looking at businesses, both small and large, will be hit and will have to lay off people, effectively bringing a large number of employees that are now unemployed, with an underwhelming or overwhelming number of job losses across the sector, you could see a collapse in the economy. And again, this kind of leads to the domino effect where people cannot pay their bills. It is just going to go one by one. Then, of course, it leads us to the failing of the banks. Banks begin to fail or imposing stricter withdrawal limits to their customers, not allowing them to take out their cash and readily available, which of course could prevent you from taking out your money, which means definitely store some cash at home, guys. That way, if you ever do need it or if something should happen, you have to make sure that you are prepared. And of course, when it comes to international trade, global economics will affect everyone. We have gotten to a society where we are reliant on every other country. We get imports from every country. We export to every country. It is really a global economic scale that we're thinking of. That is the reason why me personally, I always invest in the United States. 50% of the global economy is based in the United States. And of that, a majority of the companies that are even here are in every other country that we see around the world, which is pretty impressive. But overall, the big reason why I do it. And the final one, which is the saving grace, reliance on your neighbors, reliance on a community as your whole. That is right, working together with your community, with your families. You can barter, you can create school circles, you can build wealth, you can weather the storm. We've gotten through this years and years ago, and we can continue to do it now. So all right, guys, so that is going to do it for today's video. Let me know in the comments what you guys think, and as always, thank you guys for watching.